How's everybody doing today? It's nice to have good weather. Thank you. My name is Dion. I run Bright Digit here in Lansing, Michigan, focusing on app development in the Apple space. So I do mostly iOS apps, watch apps, Mac apps, anything having to do with Apple. If you have any questions about that, please let me know. I'd love to help. If your company needs to have some sort of software in that space, definitely reach out to me. We also do some marketing automation as well, and kind of that mesh between marketing and software development. And part of that, I wanted today to talk about my journey into podcasting and how that's grown and some of the lessons that I've learned in that period of time. There we go. So what we'll talk about, first I want to get into the why. Why do you want to do this? Because I think it's important with any big project and endeavor to understand your purpose for doing it and whether you can really invest the time and effort into something like this. And then we'll talk about the how. That is building content, staying organized, staying disciplined, dealing with the audio, so the kind of technical aspect with audio, publishing to the web, and then we'll talk a little bit about sharing and marketing. So like I said, I run Bright Digit, and part of that, I also run 2 podcasts. One is for my business called Empower App Show, where we talk about, as you might imagine, Apple news, how it affects businesses and developers, and staying current with that. And then I have another podcast on personal productivity that I do with that guy over there. Eric, raise your hand. There, that guy. Eric also runs Lansing Code, so if you're interested in staying connected with our software development community, you should definitely talk to Eric at some point today. But Eric and I run OK Productive, which we're up to like 24 or 20, we're doing 25 tomorrow, right? So we've been doing that for a while. And I think it was about 2017 that I started doing podcasting, both of those at the same time. And really the thing I had to ask myself is why do this? Besides, obviously, this is a growing marketing channel for a lot of businesses. Why should you start a podcast? So, a lot of people want to jump into things because they're going to have a good time. I think this can be overvalued and undervalued as well, because having a good time is only going to take you so far, but enjoying it, having passion for whatever your expertise is going to at least carry that momentum going so that you can keep pursuing the podcast. Because with the podcast, as we'll get into, it's going to take a few episodes, it's going to take at least a year to get you up and going and building that audience. But the biggest reason, obviously, is to promote yourself. You want to promote who you are, your expertise in a specific area. In my case, I want to promote my expertise when it comes to technology in the Apple space. We had that big developer conference last week. I want to show people that I know what the heck is going on and how this might affect your business. So this is a great opportunity for me. When clients come up to me and they say, hey, we want to see some of the stuff you've done, what have you worked on? I'll be like, hey, I have 15 episodes of a podcast where I talk about various subjects. You can see what I know, what I've done. In some cases, you might want to sell something. And I think one of the pitfalls with selling anything on the web is that people just want to go out and tell you, hey, I have this thing for $12 a month, come and buy it. I think what's important is part of selling something is to provide valuable content to your audience. So you want to start off doing that, and then you provide the solution. And I think with going back to promoting yourself, selling anything on a podcast is going to be maybe part of an overall content strategy. And the icing on the cake is selling that particular product. So you probably have come here also to talk about how to actually do this, how to get into the guts of selling, actually producing a podcast. One of the things that you're going to need is actual content. You need some sort of content for your podcast. How do you pick topics? And one of the things you want to do is go back to what's your expertise and what's your passion when it comes to what this podcast is about. What I do effectively is before every show, I have a set of pre-show notes where I go through and I break down a topic into specific topics or sections. So like for instance, you could break down a topic into the 5 W's, who, what, where, why, how. You could also break it down into some sort of chronological narrative. So for instance, in this presentation here, I'm going to be going step by step through the podcasting process and how that works. So there's various ways and various methods of breaking down any sort of topic. And as we'll get into how important it is to have some sort of pre-show notes or something that you can latch onto. So besides building on your expertise and your passion, another important thing to do, and especially this is helpful when you get stuck, is to find your audience online. If your audience isn't online, you're going to have a real struggle reaching out to them with a podcast. Because if they are, I don't know, vintage fans of like TV shows that that are over like 50 years old, and most of those people aren't on the web. Like, good luck putting a podcast out and expecting them to listen. It's just not going to happen. They're still listening to the radio. They're still listening to more traditional media. So a podcast might not be the best route to go. However, if it's a very highly technical audience or it's a highly, a very young audience, you're easily going to find them somewhere on the web. So, take a look at like Reddit, Facebook groups, not just Facebook. Take a look at, like I'm a software developer, there's sites for that, for where people ask questions. There's Quora, that's another great site where people are just saying, hey, I have this challenge in my specific industry, I need help. You can go and see actual problems and look at the pain, not just the question, but also the pain in the comments that people have. Where are their real struggles with this particular topic? And also just classical web forums. Those are still very valuable, and a lot of niche cultures and audiences still use a lot of those classical web forums. So those are a few places. So we talked about building content. You've got building on your own current expertise, but also researching your audience and seeing where their pain is. So the next thing you want to look at is actually staying organized with your podcast. So there's a couple things you could do that are really helpful. One thing, like I said, have pre-show notes. This is a great way to know whether a topic is worth exploring in a whole episode, but it's also a great way to just give you an anchor point for the topic you are talking about, because you'll be surprised at how much you might forget during recording. Oh, right, I wanted to mention something about this. This is where you want to put that in. Now, yeah, there are some podcasts that go to the point of having their episodes fully scripted out. It really depends on your topic. I don't think you need that in most cases, but I think that having notes gives you an indication of how deep a topic may be, but also it gives you a way so that you're not lost during the recording of an episode. I'm going to show you here. Go back. Where are you, mouse? There. I'm going to just do this. So I have an example of show notes. Eric and I did on our podcast two episodes actually on the James Clear book, Atomic Habits. So this is actually notes for two episodes. And then you can see here we kind of break things down, when we're going to actually record, when are we going to post it. As you can see, since it's 2 episodes, we have an episode number for both episodes, the season number, the title. We have a description, so like a short description on the podcast episode. Links to our previous episodes, which we've done, because we always want to refer back to previous episodes in our podcast, and any credits we need to do. And then these are just I think it was like green was me and you were blue or something like that. We wrote down used a Google Doc to kind of like write down our notes based on this book. And so that way we can come back here and talk about the various topics and make sure we don't get lost. Now, do we follow to a T? Absolutely not. Like I can tell you that we don't. But if there's something we forget or something we miss, we can always come back and look at the notes to see if there's something we wanted to mention. And when we get to post show notes, those are great resource in actually building the post show notes, which will be publicly available when we post it on the website. So we're talking here pre-show notes for like basically talking points, as opposed to post show notes, which are posted publicly after the show. The other thing is having a schedule. There's two reasons you want to have a schedule. It sets expectations for your audience, but also it builds a habit for you and perhaps your co-host of recording on a regular basis. This is something that is super important. I'm a big believer in habits, as you probably could see, but having a habit of recording means, okay, like every Thursday morning, we're gonna record an episode. And what I've also done is I have a posting schedule every other week. So now what this has done is now given us a buffer of episodes that are pre-recorded. So when life happens, like somebody's sick or something happens on a Thursday and we just absolutely can't do it, I got to schedule a meeting with a client, we have at least a buffer so that way when scheduling conflicts happens, we don't need to record every Thursday, but we have that habit anyways ingrained. And now the audience also expects every other week a new episode of the podcast. And so that expectation is set as well. So let's get into the technical aspect, which is audio. This is the fun stuff. So the first thing I want to talk about is your microphone. I have my microphone that I use in the back. You've probably seen that there. I brought it with me. Feel free to take a look at the end of the presentation. But it's a ATR 2100, and it also comes with that, if you look back there, like a desk clamp and a pop filter. That I spent probably $80 on. And I would say that is, if you start getting serious about podcasting, that's the route I would go. I love that mic, it works great. However, I think when you first start off, I would not invest too much money in advanced recording technology. The thing is, like, you don't want to do this for like 5-6 episodes and find yourself kind of like, this is going nowhere, I don't really like doing this. For somebody starting off, it's not really worth your effort to spend a lot of money on recording equipment until you know you have that momentum going and you're going to be doing this for long term. There's a surprising amount of technology you may even have that you probably could spend less than $20 on, that you can get an okay microphone. And a lot of times audiences are pretty forgiving about recording quality if you're first starting off. And I think that when you get to that point where you want to spend some money, I would look at an ATR 2100. If you really want to get advanced, Paul probably could talk about this, but you start getting more advanced microphones where then you need like a preamp and a mixer and stuff like that. You're talking like hundreds of dollars. That's certainly a possibility when you get to that point. But I think I don't want to overemphasize the technology needs for producing a podcast. I will say this, don't use your webcam mic. Don't use your laptop mic. Any like cheap built-in microphone that comes with what you have, it's gonna pick up all sorts of crap you don't want your audience to hear. So definitely, I would not recommend that. But you can definitely buy some $20 microphones that will give you something to start off with. And then give it a year, give it like 10 episodes. You're like, this is really fun, I wanna keep doing this. Invest money in an ATR and some sort of mic stand and maybe a pop filter. It's worth your money at that point, but don't do it right away. So as far as recording, there's plenty of options. The cheap option is if you're on a Mac, you can use GarageBand. That's what I've been using lately. And if you're on Windows, there's Audacity, which is an open source application, and I've heard that works really effectively. What you want to make sure you do is that when you record, you're recording, if you're talking multiple people here, record each person on a separate track. This is going to make editing a lot less of a headache. So on the Mac, I use Soundflower to map my channels. And what I do is something that a lot of podcasts do, which is the remote interview. So I'll call somebody on Skype, I'll record Skype on a separate channel, and then I'll have myself on a separate channel. So as you can see here on this slide, where's my laser? There. So, so here's the music. Sorry, Paul, if you can't hear or see me. This is the music, this is Eric, and this is me. And actually also what I do is I will have the guest, or in some cases like Eric, since Eric's my co-host, he'll actually record the audio on his computer as well and send that to me. We usually like share it on a Google Drive so that I can edit it in. Because the sound quality of him recording it himself as opposed to me recording off of Skype is so much better. I would highly encourage that. If you have to record the Skype interview, at least you have it as backup. But what you want to do is you want to have separate channels for each person talking, so that way editing is a lot more effective. The other app that you're looking at here is Adobe Audacity. That's Adobe's audio recording editing suite. If you have Creative Cloud, this comes with it. I canceled my Creative Cloud 10 days ago because I'm not editing audio anymore. I don't have the time. I've actually outsourced that. But it's a fantastic program. On the Mac, there's also Logic Pro, which is Apple's audio editing platform that's used by a lot of podcasters. Also, talking about remote interviews, I want to also plug, there's Zencastr, which is specifically remote editing, remote interviews, and it's run on a web browser. And that will give you separate tracks for each person in a remote interview. I've heard some people have had issues with it, some people have not. Skype is the biggest one as far as doing conference calls while doing a podcast. You could also do something like maybe a Google Hangout or use Zoom and record, because Zoom has like a built-in video recording ability. You could do that and then extract the audio from your conference call as well. That's a possibility as well. So there's a lot of options when it comes to doing remote interviews. I wanted to make sure to talk about that because that's a big part of what a lot of podcasts do, and what I've been doing lately is interviewing people over like a conference call of some sort. So effectively, you're going to have this massive WAV file. You're going to export it as an MP3 file. Typically, you want to do mono, 64 kilobits per second. And okay, you have this MP3 file. What do you do with it? You want to attach some sort of metadata saying what your show is, what the title of your episode, and a short description. But then you need to put this file somewhere. So, yeah, Chad.
With that note about attaching metadata, is that done in your GarageBand?
That can be done in GarageBand. That can be done in Audition, Logic Pro. There's a Mac app called Forecast, made by Marco Armet, who runs, if you've heard of Overcast. He's a developer of Overcast. I've used that before. Any like MP3 app where you can edit like album art and title, you could do it in there. It's essentially the same thing. Thank you. Any other questions? I figured we were going to do questions at the end, but please, if you do have something, raise your hand. Thanks, Chad. That's a good one. So you have an MP3 file. You need to put it somewhere. Now, you think, oh, I'm just going to put it on my WordPress site and share it there. Like, don't do that, please, because your episode files could be anywhere between like 5 to 40 megs, and it's going to ruin your website. I can guarantee that. So you're going to want to host your file somewhere else. The first thing I tried doing was there is a WordPress plugin called Blueberry, who's one of the leading podcast hosts. You can pay for their service, but they have a free plugin for WordPress if you want to do it yourself. I did that. I hosted the file on Amazon S3, which I would describe as something like a Dropbox, but without all the frills. And I did that for about a few episodes. It was a lot of manual work. It was a pain in the butt, honestly. I wouldn't recommend it. And once my WordPress sites ended up getting hacked, I pretty much was done using WordPress and Amazon S3 to host. So I ended up going with a service called Transistor FM. I'm paying about $20 a month for 2 podcasts. And that's been fantastic because that also comes with a built-in website as well. And what you want is you want something that will host specifically about podcast hosting, because there's a lot of little things involved. In the end, you want some sort of like RSS feed, because the RSS feed is the key to a podcast show. How many of you are familiar with what an RSS feed is? Okay, like a long time ago we had Google Reader, like people use that, and like nobody does RSS. I love RSS feeds, but unfortunately they've kind of gone by the wayside. And it's essentially a chronological list of news articles, but in this case we're talking a chronological list of MP3 files, which is essentially your show. So a good podcast provider will both host your MP3 files and provide you an RSS feed for your show. So what Transistor does is I can then post the MP3 file. It updates my RSS feed automatically. It has all sorts of metadata and it hosts the site for me. Other choices are, you got Blueberry, you've got Libsyn, you've got Anchor FM. I'm trying to think of others. Podbean. Those are kind of your top tier podcast hosts. Things to watch out for: download caps. They can cap the number of downloads on your hosts. Ad insertion, I want to say Anchor does this, where they actually will look at when Chad downloads one of my wonderful episodes, it will actually go in and look up that Chad is at 48912. And 48912 means we take Leo's MP3 file, we cut it up, and we put Lansing's favorite plumbing service in between certain points of my episode. They can actually cut up the MP3 file and insert ads within it. So if you don't mind that, that's fine, but I've noticed this a lot with MP3 shows where it'll take your location and it'll try to figure out, okay, well, edit the MP3 file to add these ads into it. So if that's something you don't mind, you can go with a host like that. I think Anchor does that. If you do, that's something to think about. Those are a couple of things you want to think about when you're thinking about a podcasting host.
Those hosting providers that add the ads in for you, are those cheaper then as a result?
Yes, exactly.
Or free?
Yeah, exactly.
What about iTunes? Is that not the spot for iTunes?
We'll get to that in just a second. Cool. So yeah, go ahead.
Are you familiar with Spreaker at all?
Streaker?
Spreaker with a P?
No.
Spreaker. Okay. It's one we've been using, we're just new to it. It's not a free one, but I just wanted to do it.
No, I haven't heard of Spreaker. That's a good one though. I'll post a link. iTunes has a list of podcasting hosts. I'll post that link.
Transistor FM, that's what you recommend
I love it. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it's been really effective. Eric, you like Transistor?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think we've had really good luck with it, and they've got good support. And I just want something that just works, right?
Spreaker creates the RSS feed, and it's been, we're like I said, we're 6 episodes in, so I don't know enough to say whether it's good or bad. It's worked all right, but
Okay. Yeah, we should chat.
I'd like to do the best scenario. If Transistor's better, I'll look into it.
Yeah, we should chat for sure. Okay, let's talk about iTunes. So you brought up a really good point. When I tell Chaz, hey Chaz, you should listen to my show, it's at http:/empower.show/rss.xml. Like, I don't do that, right? Like, typically, if Chaz is going to find my show, he's going to look by the name. So this is where the important part is. We'll post a link to this, but I have a list of how to get your show on various clients. iTunes, number one. Probably the number one thing you want to do. And don't do this right away. Do this after you got like 3 or 4 episodes. I think that's the best time to start like actually posting your RSS feed to different clients. But what you're going to do, iTunes, for instance, go to Podcast Connect. Apple rebranded, right, because iTunes is dead. So they might be rebranding it, but iTunes Connect or podcastconnect.apple.com. You're going to go there, you're going to create an account, and then you're going to give them your URL to your RSS feed and maybe like a title and description. Apple has a formal approval process because well, they all actually do this, honestly, but Apple has an approval process where they're going to approve your podcast because they want to make sure you're not like some nutcase. And then the other thing you want to check is with your podcast host, you're going to tell your podcast host what your email address, because that email address is going to be contained within your RSS feed. You make sure you have the correct email address, because Apple or whoever will email you and say, hey, I saw that you signed up your show. You're claiming ownership is kind of the term that's used. So they're going to email you and say, here, click here to prove that you're claiming ownership of this show. 3, maybe 2 days. It's honestly not going to take that long. Your brand new show is now showing up in Apple Podcasts. Notice I didn't say iTunes because iTunes is dead. Apple Podcasts. It will be there. And now Chaz doesn't have to type in my stupid RSS feed URL. He can actually just search for my show. So they're all pretty much like this. You're going to look at iTunes. You're going to look Google Play. And I'm saying Google Play slowly because there's also Google Podcasts. Google Podcasts will actually use your SEO to find you. So if you have your site set up correctly, you should be good. Google should find you and add you to Google Podcasts. So yes, 2 different things. Google Play, Google Podcasts. And then you're going to see the same pattern. You know, you go.
Host first to hold all your stuff, and then all these other ones will come to the host to grab your information.
So each, like iTunes, Apple Podcasts has its own directory of podcasts. You're going to have to go to Apple Podcasts Connect to add your show manually and then approve that you claim ownership of that show.
Not hosting yourself, it's
Kind of. They mirror your files.
okay.
Okay? I wanted to make sure I made that clarification. They actually do host your files. So technically when somebody, I'm sorry, this is kind of confusing. When somebody goes and adds your show, they're actually going to be downloading it from Apple, but Apple is downloading it from your podcasting provider.
So you can't go to Apple unless you have a host to host your show.
Right, and then Apple will automatically keep in sync with your podcast host.
That makes sense.
Yep, and not all podcast clients will do this. Speaking of iTunes, so Overcast and Castro, I don't know if any of you are familiar with those clients. They just use iTunes. So if you're approved by iTunes, you'll automatically be added to Overcast and Castro. Like I said, Google Play, they have their approval process. There is, let's see what else. A lot of podcasting hosts automatically have now, will post your show to Spotify, but there is an approval process with Spotify as well. I know I want to make sure I get the stuff down. Google Podcasts, like I said, that's SEO based. Use Google Webmaster Tools to make sure your SEO is set up correctly. Stitcher, same thing. You post your RSS feed. Breaker, you post your RSS feed. You approve with your email address. Pocket Casts, same thing. They'll have something called For Podcasters or Creator Studio, and that's where you're going to post that stuff. So you'll have a website as well. Just make sure you have healthy show notes for your website so that each episode is on there. Make sure your website has some sort of way people can actually subscribe to the podcast off of the website. A lot like Transistor, they'll have a little button for each podcast client we have set up, which we've pretty much set up all of them. And you can do that right through there. Lastly, I want to talk about marketing and sharing. I think it's good to have a social media account, but I always feel like social media sounds like something that is really going to be effective, but when you actually get into it, you feel like you don't really get a lot of bang for your buck, especially if you have not started, if you're just starting out. If you already have an existing audience, social media can be very effective. The one tip I have is when you share your podcasts, one thing we've started doing is we have converted, we have like 30-second or less audio clips that we've converted to videos. Not anything fancy. You could totally take a look at our OK Productive or my Bright Digit account to see what we post on there. But they're very simple, static images, maybe a little bit of animation with a 30-second preview of the episode that's coming up. Video is going to be, Paul, is video effective? Yeah, okay. Video is effective. Okay, so when you're posting to social media, like there's a few other services out there that'll convert your audio clip to video, but if you're going to post, that's a little tip, posting it as a little short video is really effective at grabbing your audience on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, whatever. Email newsletters are still big right now. They're a great way to get your audience and be able to personally contact folks. I highly recommend this. I have my RSS feed for my show actually hooked up to my email newsletter, so that way every time a new episode comes out, people on my email newsletter can see that a new episode is out in case they're not subscribed on their client. I can't say enough about email newsletters, and they're also a great way to like create groups or tag certain people in certain audiences. That is the bulk of what I have today. I want to make sure I have enough time for Q&A. I hope you got something out of this today. Thank you so much for coming.